We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Friday edition of the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix, your host today and always. Sometimes I feel like I want to speak like a poet whose sentences drift off into eternity. Why are we here and do what we do? Through the view of you who cannot imbue the cosmic spew that we are now imbibing. Anyway, how's everybody doing? It is Friday the 21st. We are now clearly in Aries. We're almost sort of out of the final pieces around Pisces. Mercury's got to cycle through Pisces still. But we are clearly at the start of the astrological new year. Hooray, hallelujah. And spring is upon us. And we are living in a very strange world, in a very strange time. In under very unusual and bizarre circumstances. So what I wanted to do today was to get into some of these bizarre circumstances and talk about Flight 370 and some other related pieces that we can kind of go over and explore and navigate through. And in order to do that, I think we're just going to have to kind of give some backstory here as to, where we are, at least from an astrological standpoint, because that always gives us the ability to ground and understand some of the factors and energies that are currently at play. And things are aligning. A month from now, on the 20th of April, we are going to be staring down the Cardinal Cross, the Great Cardinal Cross, in the sky, with Pluto at 13 degrees, Uranus at 13 degrees, Mars at 13 degrees, and Jupiter at 13 degrees. This is going to be on Easter. Yes, that's right, on Easter. Oyster, the resurrection of the earth, that's what Easter is. And conveniently, the death of the Jesus Christos, Sananda Manuel, placed upon that day, so the pagans can celebrate with the resurrection of the body of the Son at the same time as their previous celebrations also took place. It's old news. People know this. People are aware of this, but I just thought I'd remind you. But the interesting thing about this year, this time, and by the way, on that day, just before it, on the 15th, we're dealing with a new moon and a lunar eclipse. Very powerful stuff. All the run up to the 420, 415 to 423. Those days are what I would call intense, powerful vortex days on this planet. And if you follow me at all on Facebook, I wrote about the U.S. sun. The U.S. sun. It will be conjunct. It will be conjunct Jupiter, but also part of the square. And Pluto will be opposing the U.S. sun at this time. So this is important information in terms of the astrological, the cosmic traction that's going on at this time. And I had a very intense conversation last night with Katie Galante. We were talking about we're kind of where we are with our current situation on the planet. One of the things we were talking about was the sort of the evolution of where the truth movement was and where it is now. And some of you have been with me since I started doing the radio, and some of you have been with me even pre-radio when I was just doing my blog. And there was a feeling at that time in 2008, 2009, 2010, and even 2011 to a certain extent, but really from 2008 I'd say through 2011, that we were onto something, that we were engaging in some revelatory and revolutionary type of activity in our lives, that there were a number of people waking up, and not waking up in the quote-unquote new age sense of the term of waking up, and not even waking up in the kind of truther sense, but this interesting convergence between the two, that we had been studying our esoteric language, we had been studying our esoteric knowledge, we had been engaged in our cosmic correspondences, and at the same time, we were also beginning to see what was taking place on a political level as it related to the occult and the esoteric, and reaching all the way back to Babylon and beyond, and getting into the kind of the interdimensional and even the intergalactic folds of how all this comes together, and then beginning to realize that we are inhabiting a type of a holographic universe, and a holographic universe that's mostly ruled by symbols, and symbols that are hyper-potentiated by ritual events and by technology. And so we were all beginning to awaken to this, and we were beginning to awaken to the fact that there were now events, catastrophic events, and potentially cataclysmic events that were changing our lives, and in ways that were setting off the alarm for the spiritual canary, the collective canary in the coal mine. And those events were the Gulf of Mexico and Fukushima. Those were very significant events during this period of time. So we've been dealing with this energy now, this really since, and I mean for, I would say, since 2008, 2009, because, by the way, this is the inception of the Obama presidency. And this is when everything really accelerates under Obama. This is where the disaffected Republicans and the disaffected conservatives, who had been mostly mollified during the Bush era, because they were able to say, at least say that one of their guys was in office, regardless of the fact that he is just as corrupt and as neoliberal in some ways as Barack Obama, perhaps maybe even worse. But it gave them the prophylactic of being able to accept and embrace, quote unquote, one of their own, even if they did any kind of inventory and gut check, they'd realize that the man that was in office was an imposter, and might have been an imposter on many levels. There are at least two versions of Bush. We know that. At least two. There was an episode of Star Trek. I don't know if you guys remember this episode, but something happens to Kirk in the transporter, and he gets split off and he becomes two Kirks. He becomes essentially aggressive Mars Kirk and passive Venus Kirk. And aggressive Mars Kirk, all he wants to do is be dominant, flex his will. He's warlike. And Venus Kirk, passive Venus Kirk, maybe more like Neptune Kirk. Maybe it's more Neptune Pluto. Perhaps that's what it is. There's Pluto Kirk and then there's Neptune Kirk. And Pluto Kirk is intense and over the top and overbearing. He's a leader, but he burns people along the way. Neptune Kirk can't make up his mind. He can't make a decision. I guess that could be Venus too. That could be Libra in the scales. Anyway, it's the bifurcation of Kirk. So there was that similar bifurcation of Bush. There was a Bush who was you're either with us or against us, and fuck you and flip the bird. There was that Bush. And then there was can you repeat that question, please? You're either with us or against us. Can you repeat that question, please? Thank you. Our allies are strong and committed, just as committed as we are strong and committed. And there was that Bush, right? Well, you didn't get the one guy that was kind of in the middle that was able to be both decisive and reflective. There were at least two of them. You go back, you look in time, just go back, check it out, do a little time travel, maybe watch some YouTube videos. There were at least two Bushes. This much I'm sure of. So that begs to ask us the question, how many Obamas are there? I think there's more than one at this point, obviously. Doubles are everywhere. They've been everywhere for years. There's even a theory that the Beatles had at least 2 to 3 doubles at any given point in time. But that's another topic for another show. So here we've been in this reality, quote unquote, since right around, I would say, 2008, 2009. Obama comes into power, and now we're really, things are ramping up. Things are ramping up. The information is off the charts. And then as Obama continues to occupy the White House, there are these events, which we've talked about, and there are also other events, the Boston Marathon, Sandy Hook. These are, the Aurora shooting in Colorado. By the way, what's going on with the Aurora shooting in Colorado? Nothing. There's no trial. It's, again, swept under the carpet and down the memory hole. And we get worked up over these events now. And one of the things that we talked about last night is that these events tend to be manufactured. And we talk about false flags, but maybe there's a new category called the false flag or the double false flag. And what I mean by that is that let's use the classic false flag, 9/11. Something occurred there, and it was used as a pretext to engage in some other activity, to activate some other course of action. And what happened was that 9/11 became a pretext to enter into Afghanistan. Number one. Number two, a pretext to go in and take over Iraq. That's what 9/11 allowed us to theoretically do. Because it was bolted, the document known as the Project for a New American Century, subtitled A Clear Break, which was developed at the Brookings Institute through one Robert Kagan and his disciples, and actually they're the disciples of William Crystal's father, Irving Crystal. William Crystal, by the way, is telling Americans to get ready to rally and prepare for war. Get ready. I watch a lot of old movies on TV, mostly because I despise commercials. And I can go to Turner Classic Movies and watch an entire movie without having to see a commercial. Yeah, they're not the most up-to-date movies, but you can learn a lot from movies from the past. And I'll tell you what I'm learning. I'm learning that there are a lot of war movies that Turner Classic Movies have been showing over the last week. Lots of war movies. Lots of World War I movies. Lots of World War II movies. Movies about dirigibles. Movies about planes and fighting the Germans and all that good stuff. Tales of heroism. So, is this just a coincidence? Are these war movies part of this Uranian Aryan energy? Or perhaps there is a larger theme of programming, both literal and figurative, taking place. Perhaps that's actually what's going on. And that in and of itself might relate to the Cardinal Cross that's going to take place in April. And I'll talk about more of that later, what my thoughts on that are. So we have the birth of the false flag. 9/11 was a false flag that allowed us to theoretically do other things based on the project for the new American century. Now, what happened was, in the eyes of the world, which was in a state of shock, just like people here in the United States, 9/11 as a traumatic event and a traumatically programmed event, right? We experienced collective trauma, and in the midst of the collective trauma, a new program is put into place on the backside of that. That's what happens. It was like, okay, well, we've done this, we've done this for, our little MK Ultra drones. Let's do it for everybody. Let's shock the system and insert a new program. It's a virus. That's how viruses are created. That's how viruses are put into just your regular old Joe vegetable, right? That's it. They shock it. They shocked it. They give it a virus, and then the new program is inserted on the other side of that. So that was a legitimate false flag. But what do we have now? Now we have these events. Now, there are some people, by the way, who could say on some level that 9/11 never happened. And there are varying degrees of that. Let's look at just a few of these sort of potential scenarios. Scenario one would be the no plane scenario, that there were no planes, that it was a controlled demolition, that what we saw was clearly what TV wanted us to see, intended us to see. That we have the video of the plane flying into the building, but did the plane ever really fly into the building? Now, something might have flown into the building, but it may have not been a plane. Now, something happened at the Pentagon, but again, was it a plane? And then we get into what happened in Shanksville, and nothing happened in Shanksville. It was just a big ditch. A big ditch with a bunch of debris. Where do we get debris? Ah, yes, Flight 370 in the Indian Ocean. Potential debris fields, right? Debris doesn't mean anything, especially as it relates to the Shanksville situation in the Shanksville location. Debris means nothing. And I think that the debris thing, or the debris piece with Flight 370, which we're going to get into, is just a false lead. That's all it is. It's a way to keep this thing going in the minds of people. So there's this theory that there were no planes. There's also a theory that nobody died, which is not a good theory, because I know for a fact that there are people that died in 9/11. And I met someone whose brother actually died in one of the buildings. So I think we can move that theory out of the way, that nobody died. There were people that did die. And there was such a furor with the families with 9/11 that it's become an issue. And this is what I've talked with Jay Widener about when I've tripped out to Boulder. And the reason why we have these false flags now where everything is completely controlled is that, or what I would call the false flag, is that they want to be able to control what happens afterwards and what happens with the people afterwards, right? Because if there's survivors and families, that's a whole other level of control that they've got to get engaged in. But if everything's actors and nothing happens, then they don't have to deal with that. There's no fuss, no muss, right? They just have people that they employ move from location to location to location and give them the appearance of being real participants in the event. So now we have the false flag. And what's come out of Sandy Hook? Well, we covered this a couple of weeks ago, and what's come out of it is a lot of money's been raised, a lot of money, millions of dollars, the Sandy Hook Fund. There's been some call for taking firearms away in the state of Connecticut, although that's not working really well. You know, what's happened on the heels of the Boston Marathon? Not a lot, although the thing with the Boston Marathon, the piece with that was a test run. It was a test run to see how people will respond to armed forces literally going from home to home, searching homes, telling people to stay in their homes. How will people respond to that? Well, they got plenty of information out of that one, didn't they? Plenty. People were as docile as can be. They cheered these quote-unquote public servants on at every street corner. They complied without any compunction and gave them enough, I think, tangible data to say that they could probably roll this out just about any city in the United States. Just about. There are some that they would not be able to do it with. I'll tell you right now, they wouldn't be able to do it in Dallas. They wouldn't be able to do it in a place like what else? Let me think of another city where they wouldn't be able to do it. Well, I'm having a hard time, to be honest with you. Maybe Phoenix. I don't think they'd be able to do it in Phoenix. Too many people with fire sticks in Phoenix. But we have now what I would call the false flag. That there's nothing going on. That there's no real event taking place. And in some ways, perhaps nothing coming out of that false flag, which causes people to get riled up and angry and then get into some kind of more confrontational mode. Not like 9/11. 9/11, a lot was put in place. It was the template. Everything that we're living out now is the post-9/11 nightmare. And it's part of the alternate timeline that I've talked about before, which we're inhabiting. So that brings us to Flight 370, which is the false flag. So now we have an event that we're spending a great deal of time exploring, discussing, coming up with theories as to what happened, what took place, where the people are, ad nauseum. It's taking up more headspace, more headline space than just about any other event. Even more space than what's happening in Ukraine and Russia and Crimea, which, by the way, we are slowly inching towards World War III, if you haven't figured it out. If the clock is, if World War III is at midnight, we're at 11:59, and maybe about 25 seconds. That's where we are. Now, the United States and the EU and all their pals have decided to place sanctions on Russia. Why? Because Russia had a referendum with Crimea, and Crimea voted to join Russia, but of course, the elections are rigged, they're bullied, they've been intimidated, so Russia can't even run its own goddamn country. Can't. It has to be under the scrutiny and the observation and the judgment and the tyranny of the Western world, which is now comprised of the EU, the United States, and Israel, is the new axis of evil. I'm sorry. Mars is on my Mercury, and I am just telling it like it is. It's the new axis of evil, folks. And you're a part of it. You're a part of it. Yes, the country you live in, if you are listening to this broadcast somewhere within the boundaries of the European Union or the United States of America or our good friend in the Middle East, you're a part of it. You can throw Saudi Arabia in there too. They're part of it as well. Yeah, that's right. You are part of this column now, which is being openly aggressive towards Russia and will be openly aggressive towards China because they are courting World War III. You, my friends, are probably on the wrong side and on the wrong side of history. Unless, of course, you wake up. But even if you wake up, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to stop the war machine. Now, what would be the advantage of having World War III? Well, one of the advantages of having World War III is that, number one, it would be the war to end all wars. Let's just put it out there. That's what's going to happen. It would make World War II seem like a bar fight. That's what will happen. And I would say that extremely large numbers of people will be sacrificed as a result of this war. And there will be war memorials around the planet. It will be a war that we all be forced to remember, the war to end all wars. This was the war that brought humanity together under a one world government, a one world currency, a new order that arose out of the chaos of our inability to control our anger, our frustrations, our greed, our hypocrisy, our prejudices. And out of this world, out of this new world, we'll be able to have the ability to create a new future of one people, one planet, one purpose. That's what the next World War is about. That's what it's about. And I'm not saying if it happens, it's when it's going to happen. I think it's almost an inevitability. Now, can we change these things? Potentially, maybe. Maybe they just keep getting fouled up in their own way. They keep tripping over their own shoelaces. I'm convinced that they were ready to throw down in Syria when they had that protest in Turkey. And that protest in Turkey basically took the Turks out of the armament phase and deployment phase. And I'm assuming that protest in Turkey was staged by the Russians. Remember that? It was over the park. And I think that it was probably in some ways organic, but at another level, these things begin to become much more manufactured and synthetic, especially when there's some kind of momentum. People get involved, ladies and gentlemen. They get involved. So my sense is that protest in Turkey was likely staged by the Russians. And as a result, there was momentum that was lost in Syria. And of course, what Russia did in Syria, the gamesmanship in Syria, in calling Obama out on the chemical weapons. By the way, how embarrassing are John Kerry and John McCain? How embarrassing. John McCain is out there spouting that Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country. This is diplomacy. This is statesmanship. And John Kerry with that hang dog, remember Deputy Dog? Deputy Dog, remember him? John Kerry looks like Deputy Dog. He's got that Deputy Dog, hang dog kind of face. Traipsing around the globe. Well, we won't tolerate this kind of tyranny. We won't tolerate this kind of heavy-handed action as it stands in the way of democracy, and blah, 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 blah. Aren't you sick of it? Aren't you just absolutely, utterly sick of these people and their puppetry and their masquerading around the planet as being meaningful? The jig is up. The game is over. We get it. We understand it. And so what do we do now? Now they have us focus on this chimera of an event, Flight 370. It's taking up a lot of bandwidth. Well, by the way, we are marching towards World War III. But why is it taking up so much bandwidth? Why has it been captured in the collective imagination? Well, one of the reasons why is because the media won't let it go. That's why. But it's also a compelling story on some level, I guess. I get no heat. Off of this. None whatsoever. No heat. Zero. No heat. Which to me means that probably it didn't exist. That's just my sense here. But let's go through the scenarios. Let's break them down. Let's try to understand what may or may not have happened. We know theoretically, again, air quotes, we know theoretically that the plane was in the air, and then all of a sudden it went to 45,000 feet, and we heard the last conversation from the co-pilot who sounded like he was on Quaaludes. And then, poof, gone, done, gone. No mas, as Roberto Duran once said, no mas. And so what are the scenarios now? What are the plausible scenarios? Okay, scenario number one, the patent scenario. And the patent scenario goes like this. There are 4 guys on that jet who are part of a company called Freescale. Freescale has a patent that allows them to make, Freescale, by the way, located here in Austin, Texas. Freescale has a patent that allows them to make chips at a rate larger than 100 chips on a sheet at a time. Because that's as many as you can make. You can only do sheets of 100. Apparently, somebody at Freescale figured out a way to make, say, 1,000 chips on a sheet, which means that production explodes exponentially. You get to produce more for a lot less money. Basic economics. Theoretically, 4 of those guys are on the plane. They're the 4 developers, the major patent holders. Now, I have a problem with this scenario on one level because I used to work in corporate America. And in corporate America, they do not let people fly on the same flight if they are important to the company. So, for instance, the CEO and the COO may not be on the same plane. They just wouldn't allow it because if something should happen to one of those people on their plane, then at least they have the fallback of another person to run the company. It is basic corporate structure. And the corporation I worked for was a music company. It wasn't even something as high level as a company that manufactures chips, which is pretty high level. So if you're that chip company and you have 4 guys who are theoretically the patent holders inside the company, because they have a piece of that patent, each one of them, are you going to let them fly in the same flight? The answer would be unequivocally no. N-O. Now, does human error occur? Do people think, oh, nothing will ever happen to me? Yes, perhaps. Perhaps. But just from a corporate protocol perspective, that is generally not allowed to take place. And yet it did. So let's play along with it. Let's play along with that scenario. We've got the 4 guys on there. They own the patents, and they are part of Freescale. Freescale is a part of a larger corporation called the Blackstone Corporation. And conveniently enough, you can just go right onto Wikipedia and find that the Rothschilds have a vested interest in Blackstone. So now the Rothschild scenario comes into play. Yes, the Rothschilds. Manipulating space and time like they once did during the Napoleonic conquest, where they profited massively off the stock exchange in London, which they helped create, by the way. So now what happens? Oh, well, the 4 patent holders, well, they're gone or missing, and so those patents are now reverting to the parent company, and the parent company is ultimately Blackstone, which is owned by the Rothschilds. So they scoop up the patents, and they now have the patent for this sheet of more than 100 chips. So it was all done to eradicate these patent holders, all in one fell swoop. Now, have you been watching the dead bankers list, toll list? That's up to 12 now. If people wanted to take people out individually, they could. Wouldn't be a problem. Do you have to hijack an entire plane in order to do that? I don't know. Maybe it's the most efficient. But let's think about this for just a second. Let's play this out. Let's say it's plausible. Then what would happen is that there would have to be some foreknowledge that all 4 of these men would be on this plane. There'd have to be corporate communication. They'd have to know the exact plane, where it is, where it's going to take off, and they would have to use some kind of very sophisticated AWACS technology in order to navigate that plane into a secret base, maybe somewhere, Diego Rivera or someplace like that, one of the islands in the Indian Ocean, and then boom, those guys are just, who knows, put into some slave labor camp on Mars or something. So it'd have to be a really high-level series and links of networks and cooperation in order for that to take place. And then now, all of a sudden, everybody's reading about this. We're able to put the Rothschild stamp on the event, and there we have our scenario, our plausible scenario. The only problem with this scenario is that the company itself owns the patent. And these guys might just have a piece of the patent. But I don't think it's necessarily enough to make a case that this plane was taken out of circulation because of the 4 guys on that plane and their patents. I don't think it's enough. I think it's a false lead. A false lead for a false flag. Okay, let's look at scenario number 2. There is the defense contractors or the weapons experts scenario. Now, in this scenario, there are a number of people. I think 20 is the number. So we have 4 and 20. Isn't that interesting? The 4 patent holders and the 20 military industrialist weapons experts, 420. And they are the ones that are the real target of the plane because we are about to engage in a war, and these guys all have high-level security clearance. They have high-level understanding from a technical and tactical standpoint with sophisticated weaponry. Now, again, I ask you, what government in the world would, number one, have these guys fly on a commercial airline, number one, and number two, why would they have them fly together? Does that make sense? Does that make sense to you? Hey, let's round up 20 of our most sophisticated weapons experts. Let's put them all on a commercial plane, and let's get them to where they're going, and just hold our noses, look the other way, and pray that nothing happens to them, because if something does, we're screwed. Instead of putting them on about 3 or 4 or 5 different flights, which is the most strategic thing to do, or perhaps even putting them on an actual military flight, which would protect them. But this doesn't happen, and now these weapons experts are supposedly, quote unquote, lost. So now we have another trail. Now we have another rabbit hole to go down. Aha, it's the weapons experts. It's the patents. It's the patent holders. Now it's the weapons experts. None of that makes sense to me. If you have high-level brain trust, you do not put them all on one plane. End of story. Scenario number 3. Now, while they're sort of, in the first 4 or 5 days of this mystery, trying to understand what happened, there's a narrative that begins to emerge. And more than likely, this is the quote-unquote a official narrative, and that official narrative is the pilot. And of course, there are a lot of great clues that the pilot has left behind. First of all, the night before the flight, his wife and children vacate the house. Gone. In hiding, underground. Then, of course, he has the flight simulator. The homemade flight simulator. Well, okay. My father had a flight simulator. My father learned how to fly a variety of planes all around the world and land them in airports all around the world. My father was not a pilot. He had a nice flight simulator, and he figured that out. This guy's a pilot. He has a flight simulator. Do you see anything wrong with that picture? Now, if he is, let's say, for instance, he's I don't know. Let's say he is a felon who'd been recently released from prison, and the last crime that this felon had committed was some form of a civil or social disturbance. And now all of a sudden he's got a flight simulator in his home. Now we're having a bit of a different picture. There's more of a disconnect in some ways. It's like, well, why does this guy who was convicted 10 years ago for being within the vicinity of a bomb that went off at a protest, here in the United States or elsewhere, why does this guy have a flight simulator? And of course, maybe he's learning how to fly with an online program, because everybody knows that if you want to learn how to be a pilot, you can just take those quick online training courses. By the way, if being a pilot is soon to be obsolete, in the next 15 to 20 years, planes will fly themselves, and pilots, the only thing, there will be one pilot on board planes, just in case something goes wrong. But I'm telling you, commercial airlines, 10 to 15 years from now, will not, and I repeat, will not have humans flying them. And even in the combat theater, there's a very good chance that humans will not be flying planes. And in fact, it's been rumored that the last pilot training program through the USAF has been initiated, and it is the last one. It's a program that's going to basically end. Why? Because of the drone technology. That's why. The drone technology. And when that happens, less humans. That's all I'm talking about. That's all I'm saying. So, okay, we have the pilot. The pilot conveniently poses for a picture with a T-shirt about democracy, the failure of democracy. Then it comes out that the pilot has a relationship with a resistance leader inside Malaysia. Now, to understand Malaysia, you have to understand its politics. A very conservative country. Mahathir, the former prime minister of Malaysia, talked about Israel, the United States, the evil empire, the protocols of Zion. And this guy was, he was all over it. He was calling it out as he saw it in the global media. And Mahathir eventually retired. Now there's a new PM in Malaysia, but I'm telling you right now, it's a very similar zeitgeist. So this is what's happening inside Malaysia. Malaysia theoretically could be potentially antipathetic towards globalist interests. And so now we have the potential for some kind of color revolution. Yes, that's right. Exactly. So perhaps this is yet another opportunity, or an opportunity that's being concocted and used to create another Ukraine or another Libya or another Syria, because of the political beliefs of the pilot. Now, I have a bit of a problem with that scenario, that the pilot was involved. The pilot did this as some form of political protest. I have a problem with it. Number one, the problem is that the pilot had children, theoretically. It's my experience that people with children are far less likely to sacrifice themselves for a cause or an ideal because of their bond with their children. It's just the facts, Jack. I'm sure it happens, but it's very rare, because the overriding instinct in a human is, especially one that has a family, and especially somebody that comes out of a traditional family structure like Malaysia, their natural instinct is to protect the family, not sacrifice yourself for some political ideal and leave the family afloat and unable to fend for itself. And not just fend for itself, but also be at risk for some kind of arrest, some kind of, incarceration. If the pilot was doing this and thinking this through, he would have said that my family is at a huge risk if I do this. And I don't know. It would have to be some really major event to put yourself in harm's way like that, and perhaps change the course of history to sacrifice your family. It would have to be along those lines. That would be the emotional and psychological trade-off. So I think there's a flaw in that theory, simply because, and look, are there quote-unquote deranged lone gunmen, wingmen, pilots? I guess, but that's consistently the theme that we're getting, right? Act alone. It's always the theme we get now. So could he have done it? Possibly. But again, I think that of all the narratives, this is the one that is the most staged narrative. this is the one that has the most, what I would call marketing behind it. And the whole event in some ways has become almost like a marketing event. If you look at the pictures, prayers for Flight 370, I went to a website, tomatobubbleemperor.com, or Emperor Tomato Bubble. I forget what it's those three words. But one of the things that was really interesting is that all the signs that are in support of the flight and finding the flight, they're all written in English. They're all written in English. Of course, because everybody speaks and writes in English in Malaysia. And there are some other similarities to other events. You know, the candle bags, which they used in Sandy Hook, you know, where you have the paper bags, you put the candle in them and they heat up and then they rise in the sky. Well, they did that for Sandy Hook. They did that for Flight 370. There are a number of scenarios, photo ops, the same kinds of messaging, prayers for Sandy Hook, prayers for Flight 370. The same kinds of memes are being rolled out with Flight 370 as they were with Sandy Hook and some of these other events. So if Sandy Hook, and I think we did a pretty good job, Jay and I, a couple of weeks ago, talking about Sandy Hook and proving to a great extent that Sandy Hook didn't exist at all, that the Boston Marathon didn't exist at all. Why should Flight 370 exist at all? Why? Why? And if it didn't exist, if Flight 370 didn't exist, and we're all just pulling at straws, that it slipped into a wormhole, that the aliens abducted it, that it's been eviscerated, and we have all these tantalizing things that we're all trying to wrap our heads around and solve, why is it taking place? What's the purpose? Well, the purpose is to get our attention. Number one, to get our attention. That's it. To get our attention. To get us to focus on this. To get us distracted. Yet another distraction. A big distraction. Meanwhile, over here, the other hand is marching towards war. Look over here. Look over here for the plate that didn't exist. Meanwhile, over here, the pieces are being put into place. They're being put into place to initiate the final stage of where we are. All right, I'm going to play some music, and when I come back, we're going to get into this. And, you know, what I'd like to do is I would like to take your phone calls. I would like to take your phone calls. I would like to see what you think about Flight 370, what your take on it is, what you think happened. That's what I want. So I'm going to play Last Plane Out by Toy Matinee. Isn't that fitting? Last Plane Out, Toy Matinee. And when we get back on the other side of this, 347-308-8995, 347-308-8995. I want to know what you think. Here's Last Plane Out.
The trees are all cleared. No time for a conscience, and we recognize no crime. Yeah, we got dogs and Valvoline. It's a pretty damn good time. Man of reason, not of rhyme. Keep the spoils harbingers of doom. And this party is addictive, self-destructive, no doubt. So I hope that someone saves a seat for me on the last plane out.
Last plane out. Kevin Gilbert, a.k.a. Toy Matinee. God rest your soul, Kevin. It's 12:59 here in Austin, Texas, where I dwell, where I live. Interesting place, Austin. I spend a lot of time in Boulder. I really like Boulder. Boulder is Boulder's an interesting city. There are people in Denver that can't stand Boulder, which I've come to find out. You know, you get on planes, you talk to people, and people in Denver think that Boulder is another country, truly, unto itself. And I understand why, because it's almost impossible to do business in Boulder. There are so many rules and regulations and city ordinances that it is extremely difficult to get anything done. And they have some very almost draconian points of control inside the city limits of Boulder. However, it's also one of the best places to live if you are homeless or disabled, because there are so many social services in place in Boulder to help the homeless and the disabled that it is a kind of a go-to place if you can get there and deal with the winter in Boulder. But there's also a fairly enlightened kind of, crowd. I go to restaurants when I'm there and hang out a little bit, talk to people, and everybody I meet is super nice and open and positive. And so I get to spend a lot of time there, and I'm happy when I get to go there. One of the things I see people in Boulder do a lot is ride bikes. A lot of bike riding in Boulder. And even here in Austin, occasionally I will see people ride bikes, although the area that I live in is on a kind of a big, almost freeway in some ways. It's a highway. So I don't see a lot of bikes, but I see people riding bikes. Have you ever seen people that ride bikes that look cool, right? They manage to really look cool. And you also get the sense that the bike is their only form of transportation. And maybe it's one of those bikes that's one of those beach cruisers or something like that. So they've invested in the cool factor of the bike. And they manage to wear shades and whatever on that bike and make it look really cool. I think those people are interesting. It's like, man, look at that person. That's probably their only mode of transportation. And they look really cool. They look free. They look liberated. Maybe I should sell my car and just ride a bike. Get a beach cruiser, ride around. How cool would that be? All right, so let's get into this. Oh, by the way, if you have not checked out Guy on TV, I've got a show there, The 11th House, and today, part 2 of Babylon Working. Pops, check it out. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of strange connections between Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard and Marjorie Cameron and some of the events that have taken place over the last few months, including the Super Bowl, including Philip Seymour Hoffman, and including River Phoenix, the brother of Joaquin Phoenix, who was Jack Parsons in the movie about Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard, also known as the Master. That pops today, Guy MTV. You can go there. You can go to 11thhouse.tv, and you can sign up, and you can get a free 10-day trial. And there's a lot of good programming. William Henry just started a new show there called Arcanum, and he and his wife are looking at art and the symbolism of art throughout the centuries, and the esoteric hand, the occult hand that is present in art, sort of hidden in plain sight symbolism. You can find out more about that through William Henry's show over at Giant TV. Very, very turned on, interesting, spiritual guy, William Henry. Okay, it is 1:04 here. Let's try this. I'm going to open the phone lines. 347-308-8995, 347-308-8995, and you can call in. I want to know what you think about Flight 370. I want to know what you think. I want to know what your theory is, if you have a theory. I want to know if you want to share or what you think about just the whole phenomenon in general. Why it's taking up so much bandwidth. Why are we being fed this in the 24/7 news cycle? So 347-308-8995. I'm going to have Patricia Corey on next week. Some of you might know Patricia Corey. She's an author, and she was a channeler at one point in time. And she was channeling messages from Sirius, from the Syrians. And her first couple of books were pretty amazing. And I bought them at the time. They were only available in Italy because that's where Patricia was living. They were only available in Italy. And I bought the books, and I thought she needs an American publisher. So I hooked her up, and I helped her get a deal. She's got a new book out. It's a fiction book. We're going to talk to her next week. We're going to find out about the transition from channeling to fiction and what her new work is all about. So that's Patricia Corey next week. Let's take a call. Hello there.
Hello.
Is this Tessa?
Tessa.
Hi,
Yep.
Tessa. Long time no speak. How are you?
Oh, hanging in there as usual.
Tessa, this flight 370 seems to be almost a page out of one of your husband's books in some ways.
Well, I'm 90% certain that somebody landed that plane somewhere. And the best theory I've heard from others is that the U.S. hijacked it and landed it on a man-made island in the Indian Ocean. I keep forgetting the name of the island, but it is a military base, a U.S. military base on a man-made island.
So what would be the point of that?
Scientists and technical people and patents.
Right. So now we're back to the scientists, patents, weapons, people, all that stuff, right? So, look, I'm open to just about any, well thought out. Or here's the other thing about this, Tessa, is that sometimes there are insiders that actually, leak things. Nothing's really been leaked about this, and sometimes the leaks are false leads for us to follow. Sometimes they're not, but there haven't been any real quote unquote leaks per se, not that I know of. But let's just say that this is true. again, my question at the top of the hour or through the majority of the show is, if you were a company that had so much investment in your brain trust, why would you put them all in the same plane?
Maybe the same reason that the people involved in Obama's birth certificate were all on the same plane. It's a miracle that anybody lived through that crash.
Well, the woman who it was the official Hawaii that was in charge of the birth certificate, she's dead.
Yeah.
She's
but
gone.
There were others in the plane who survived who were also involved in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And
but that's different, though. I mean, I don't necessarily think that those people are going to all get on the same plane and say, "Hey, we're all involved in the birth certificate, and we're it doesn't really matter. We're okay. We are on the right side of this, or at least we think we are." I think that that's different. It's different than a company putting their brain trust on a plane. I think it's different. Why would they do that?
Well, perhaps they're in on it in some way. Either we wanted the scientists or we wanted to deprive China of them. And you need to remember that these big corporations do not have national allegiances. They're in it for themselves.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it can be a case of both sides against the middle. That would be another sort of iteration of that. Okay, well, let's just put that in a plausible envelope, that it was hijacked by the United States military-industrial complex as a accomplice to some form of corporate control. Is that what your theory is?
Pretty much. It's a sketchy theory. I can't fill in the details, but the whole thing is fishy because there are two ways to cover up something that you've done in a clandestine manner. One is to keep it the news entirely, and the other is to cover every little thing so widely and take up so much time with it that people get tired of it and stop listening.
Right. So when do you think that's going to happen with this? We're into this now. This is the second week we're into this, by the way.
Well, they're already doing it. There's debris in a part of the ocean where all our plastic shopping bags collect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they couldn't possibly take a look at it with a satellite or the space station, or instead they spend millions of our tax dollars flying over the Indian Ocean, and they're sending our Navy and China's Navy, and military gets fatter and fatter.
Well, you bring up a good point. I mean, we have the planets covered in satellites, many of which belong to the United States, some of which belong to Russia and China. And these satellites are essentially surveillance satellites. That's what they are. They're continually mapping the planet and looking at activity. And I find it very hard to believe, between the three superpowers, that there is not nary a trace of any kind of satellite information that either of them
one
have.
Commercial satellite that can't really focus, but the military satellites can read your license plate.
Absolutely. This is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So let's say, for instance, the United States did this, then I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibility that Russia or China, or perhaps even another country, India, Israel, whoever else has the technology, has a record of it. I just don't. We live in a time where it's almost impossible to disappear, and yet, we are being told that there's this story in this plane, and it's mystifying, and nobody has any answers, and I don't buy it. And so, if the United States did do that, then I think that the United States' quote-unquote rivals in the world know exactly what happened. And the whole thing then becomes another scam, right? That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, and meanwhile, you don't hear about the riots in Venezuela or the atrocities in the Middle East, or what they're doing right here in the U.S., like Connecticut and New Jersey, sending in the National Guard to confiscate guns that were perfectly legal when the people bought them.
Right. We had a similar thing here in Texas, where the ATF went in and raided a company called Ares Ammunition, and this was a company that was a private company that sold ammo and clips and even some firearms, completely legal. The ATF went in there and did a massive raid. This was just 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
So, yeah, you're right. There's a lot going on that, again, we're not necessarily being told or shown. Is this something that Phil would have written about, do you think? Is this kind of a Phil Dick scenario?
Oh, quite possibly, especially in the case of Ares, where what they wanted and got was lists of customers.
Yeah.
You know, first you make the list, then you conduct the pogrom.
That's right. That's right. Because those would be sophisticated people on some level, and then you would look at who they're friends with as a result of the list, right? So now you get to build that list out.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think they plan to keep their power the same way the British did in the Middle East. If an Arab shot an Englishman, they'd kill that guy and his parents and his children and his siblings and his cousins and their cousins and so on, so there was no one left.
Well, yes. Yes. That's what we call genocide, by the way. So, yeah, you're right.
But it's okay when we do it.
Well, it's never okay, but yeah, I hear you. But it's under that now it's about spreading democracy, which is the buzzword, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, all right. So are you going to go back? Well, go ahead.
Why aren't we spreading liberty?
Because democracy has become a code word for socialism. That's why.
Mob rule.
It's a code word for socialism. Liberty is much more dangerous than democracy, and they don't want to spread that. They certainly don't.
Oh, yeah. Under our so-called republic, people are taught in school that the majority rules, but they are not taught about the law.
This is true. They're certainly not taught about natural law or common law, which is a whole other topic that we can get into at some point. So
Yeah.
Yeah. So other than that, are you doing okay?
Yeah. It's just so weird. The whole Midwest has been freezing with rain and snow and sleet, but here in California, everything bloomed in February, and it should have been snowing up here on the mountain.
Yeah.
Have you got
any more rain lately in California?
Well, back in February, we got 20 inches in less than 4 days, and our average annual rainfall is 18 inches. But we are still in a drought because Nestle pumps out the aquifers to make bottled water to sell overseas.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yep.
That's Nestle's MO, isn't it? Privatizing water.
Yep.
That's what
they
want
to
do.
I haven't watered since last October, right before it snowed, and yet my yard is full of mud. But we're in a drought. Go figure.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, what's going to happen, either real or perceived, the prices of food are going to go through the roof because California is the green belt for the planet. It produces roughly, I would say, about 35 to 40% of the world's produce. And in a time of drought, again, either real or perceived, it's going to impact the farmers. And I remember clearly back in 2012 driving to San Diego and seeing signs from farmers that were protesting the fact that their water was going to be controlled by a third party, and that would tell them basically when they couldn't use their water. So this is a huge problem, and as a result, we're probably going to see much higher prices at the grocery lines in the summer and fall because of what's happened in California, which of course many people just can't handle because of their already strained budgets. So
they were already cut off. They are not going to get anything from the California aqueduct this year. Plan is for the farmers to get foreclosed and kicked out so a big corporation can come in and plant Monsanto's GMO crops everywhere.
That's right. They don't want family farming anymore. If they do have family farming, they have to be clearly on the side of Monsanto.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, Tessa. We're only going 90 minutes. We're only going 90 minutes today, so I only have a little less than 10 minutes left in the show. So
okay.
I'm gonna sign off with you, and it's good to hear your voice, and good to see you back in the chat room. And thank you for calling in.
Well, thank you.
And do your best to have a good day. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
You too.
That is Tessa Dick, and she, of course, is the widow of one Philip K. Dick, whose speech from 1976 in Metz, France, I play at the beginning and end of each show. We've got 8 minutes left. If you've got an idea or a theory about Flight 370, if you think it's a bunch of shit, if you think it's a distraction, if you have any clear idea as to what's going on, or at least you think you do, you've got a few minutes left to call in, 347-308-8995, 347-308-8995, and then we can get on the air and riff a little bit. Tessa's theory is the government, United States hijacked and moved to an island, landed in an island, an artificial island in the South Pacific, where the brain drain of the scientists and patent holders above the plane is currently taking place. I'm trying to get some more guests on the upcoming Fridays here because it's important. We're going to keep this Friday tradition alive. I actually miss doing radio. You know, I had to take a hiatus in the first of the year because I had a lot going on in my life, and I had to take a hiatus. But I really miss radio, and I miss connecting with people, and I miss the interactivity that goes along with that. So it feels good to be back on the air, and we're going to try and crank this thing up to 3 hours on Friday. That's going to be the plan moving forward. I've just been so incredibly busy on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays that I have to have those days now, unfortunately. But it's good because I think we'll get quality radio at 3 hours worth of quality radio as a result. Let's do this one more time. Quick call out 347-308-8995 if you want to get do a quick drop in here on Flight 370 and what you think has occurred or not occurred. I'm of the mind that the flight never happened. That's my theory, and that was one of the first things that jumped out of my consciousness, is that the flight never happened. And this is all one huge false flag and distraction. So you're listening to the Friday FARcast. I'm Robert Phoenix. And again, if you are into astrology at a meta level, at a hyper level, I have a show over at Gaiam TV. It's called The 11th House. And today, my episode on the Babylon Working, Part 2 breaks with Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard and all that good stuff. That's happening today over at Gaiam TV. All right, it looks like we are not going to get any more calls. I think there are basically 4 theories around the plane. I've laid them out. There is the patent theory. There is the military-industrial complex weapons expert theory. There is the theory that it was stolen, essentially, by a political dissident. And then there is the 4th theory, which is it never existed. I'm not entertaining the portal or vortex theory. I'm not entertaining the alien theory. I'm not entertaining the Bermuda Triangle theory. We've got one other caller here. Let's see what it's a foreign caller. We've only got about 4 minutes. Let's see what they have to say. Hello there.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, cool. You said foreign caller, so I didn't know you were talking to me. This is William.
It looks like you're calling from another country. Is that right?
Oh, no, that's because I'm on Skype. That's why.
Okay. So we only have a few minutes. Welcome to the show. What's your name?
William.
Oh, hey, William.
Yeah.
So what's your take here, real quick? We only got a few minutes left. I'm assuming you're calling in for Flight 370. What do you think?
I think you're right on, bro. I think you're right on. I think it didn't exist.
Yeah.
And I think you're picking up. I mean, you've done way more research than I have, so you've got all all the background on it. So I don't feel like I can comment that intelligently on it. But from what you're hearing your rundown of everything, all the different scenarios there. I think you're identifying. That's the pattern going right now. Sandy Hook, like you said, Boston bombing. They didn't. Most likely didn't exist or existed on much lower levels than they were, being portrayed as. And I think the same thing's going on with this. Probably didn't even exist at all. Yeah,
I mean that's kind of my theory around it. So if that's the case, then why are they doing it? That's the big question, right?
Yeah, you're right on with that too, bro. World War III, man, that's a big deal. They don't want attention. They don't want any collective attention going to what they're trying to set up. I think that's a brilliant take.
Yeah.
What you said.
Well, I'm certainly not alone, because I think there are other people out there that are, playing with similar scenarios, but it's certainly not coming through the mainstream media. And it's like, watch this hand while the other hand is doing something else completely different.
Right.
It's a classic misdirection play. So at least that's my sense.
Yeah. I mean, so if that's your sense, so if you think that that's what they're wanting to get the places, the pieces in place for a big war. As part of their plan, you think that's just again depopulation, part of the
I think it's partly depopulation. Yeah, that, and it's the war to end all war scenarios, right? It's like we had this terrible war. Let's always remember it. It's like a planetary holocaust,
Right.
And there would be memorials around the planet as to what happened, and they'll teach it in school, but it'll all be under the auspices of one government, one financial system, one collective sort of, top down, very top down, by the way, totalitarian system that'll be put in place. but it will always
Right.
It will always be about remembering. Never forget. World War III, the war that ended all wars, right? So it wouldn't just be depopulation, but it would be a flat-out system of control from this point forward. So we'll see what happens. There are a lot of vested interests, financially and otherwise. There are factions that are fighting against each other. And there are factions within factions fighting against each other. This thing is multi-leveled and layered and nuanced. But at the end of the day, it feels like there is something happening, something generating, and that something clearly is on the event horizon, and I'm thinking it's at the end of April. William, thank you for calling in. We got to split, man.
Okay, man. Good talking to you.
All right, take care. So there we go. That's William calling in. Sorry I had to cut you off, but we're at the end of the show. We got 40 seconds left, and you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. This is Robert Phoenix. I'll be back next week with Patricia Corey, and we'll be discussing her new novel. And here, in the meantime, is Philip K. Dick. And happy birthday, by the way, Erica Mermuse. Hope it was a good one.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.